So to get started, I wanted to, the way that we'll do this, and I think most of you know everyone here, so I'll just do a quick introduction. We have Sujata Balida, who spoke with us yesterday morning at the plenary and did a workshop today. We have Jackie Marapin, who is with the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, Lisa Stano, who spoke this morning, and Farrah Tanis, who also spoke this morning. So really happy to have all of these wonderful women on the stage to kind of share some closing thoughts with us. And so I wanted to just start off by asking you each to answer the first question, and from there we'll see what feels right for you to answer. So the first question that I have is, what is your biggest takeaway from being here for whatever duration you've been here, from the plenary, with the morning sessions, from the workshops? What is the biggest thing that you are taking away? Yes.
I don't remember what I originally thought it was. I have so many new things coming up, but I think more than anything, I'm feeling an incredible gratitude for an openness to new ways of thinking. And I also just really appreciate the way that the first plenary speaker really teed me up so that I could stay to my 15 minutes, because the four talks I felt really went beautifully together, and that so many of us referenced things that others could go much more deeply into than any of us individually had time for. But there was a way in which this entire thing, there was a theme that was woven through that felt very powerful to me, or multiple themes. And I just truly appreciate the history of the work that's come up until this moment, and this openness to moving in new directions and really solutions-oriented, and the thirst really to figure out new ways to do things. I think that's a bigger picture, sort of what I'm taking away. Really just a happiness that I don't often feel. At these people who beat down with terrible stories most of the time, what all is wrong. And today I feel leaving that we are all talking about what can we be doing differently with a sense of excitement. That's how I feel.
Thank you, Jeff.
So I wasn't here yesterday, but I did attend all day today, and I think what struck me the most was actually during your workshop. And for those of you who weren't there, she presented the socio-ecological model, and then added you added an additional layer to the outer circle, and that was a historical context. And there, for those of you who were there, if you remember, there was sort of this reaction from the room, and I think it did two things for me. I think one, it provided validation, because I know, having been in the field for almost 16 years now, that working individually with survivors, I could understand and I could see that historical context, but I didn't have a language to talk about it within our programs. And so I think there was a aha, of course moment. Of course, we would have a historical context attached to our conversation, but also that it's a validation that people have actually been talking about that historical context for a really long time. So that was deeply meaningful to me.
Thank you. So I think my main takeaway is just I feel so truly impressed with this whole conference and every single person in the room here today, because we're doing really hard work. It's difficult to fight sexual violence, and yet here we are pushing the boundaries by deliberately making it even more difficult for ourselves. by adding in population groups that we may just want to forget we never had there, or like starting to talk about forgiveness in new ways, and by adding historical contexts and all the different layers and nuances that will ultimately make us much more successful, but that also makes it more complex. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for me, I was really impressed and just grateful that the voices of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable, and those who aren't necessarily considered the most marginalized and the most vulnerable, like our harm doers, were brought into the space, and those who are incarcerated and imprisoned in detention were brought into the space. The space that was created here also to bring our fathers, our mothers, our sisters into the room and acknowledge them, acknowledge what they have experienced, honor that. The space that was created to bring in the ancestors into the space and acknowledge that the justice that we do is not just for us, but it's for them, because they didn't have access to justice, and that it's for future generations. I think it was extremely, to me, it's magical. I use that word a lot because there really isn't any other way to express something that just doesn't happen often. It doesn't happen everywhere, and I haven't seen this done in a very long time, if ever. I can't think of another place where all of these things and all of these people, past and present and future, were brought into the space as if they were living and breathing and as if they were part of the conversation, and that we were considering them and their well-being and their safety, their bodily integrity, and their future, and their need for justice and healing and for truth, right? As we were speaking about those very things for ourselves and for our communities, and in how we actualize, these things in our own work. And so, that to me made this even more powerful. The acceptance and the allowance for a space to be created for those of us who are here and those of us who are not.
Thank you. The anti-sexual and domestic violence movements are about, 45-ish years old. And I think, one of the things that struck me is the need to both, celebrate and some of the accomplishments that we've been successful in this time, and also to, take a critical look at what we're doing and what we may need to do differently moving forward. So my next question is just about how we reconcile that. Like, how do we reconcile the systems and structures that we have in place today with those that we still need to envision? Whoever would like to.
Well, I actually have some thoughts on that one, and I think it's a struggle we have in the criminal legal system, in the work that we're doing to reform there. I think there's a way in which we were talking about how folks who want to see full abolition sometimes throw those who are not moving in the direction of full abolition under the bus, in a sense, where they feel that they're being thrown under the bus, rather by who they call incrementalists. Right, and so there's this notion that if we try to improve conditions of confinement, say, that somehow we're letting some steam out of the pressure cooker on a system that just needs to blow. And there's a lot of infighting in our community about who's down and real and who's not. And I don't feel like this is a useful way to approach things, right? It's an odd statement as far as vegetarian, but there's this thing. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And so there's got to be a better analogy.
We all know that way.
I like a non-violent version or a vegetarian version. Somebody once recently said to me, she heard someone say, "Keep 2 birds with 1 stone." I've been reading that one for a long time. So how do we eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. And so if someone is working on the leg of the elephant, we don't have to make them the enemy because they're not trying to take the whole elephant down at once, right? And so I want us to understand that those of us who have been in this work for decades, doing great crisis work, working in veteran shelters, et cetera, aren't aren't somehow sellouts because they're a part of a system that is often funded by systems and processes that also continue to grow our criminal legal system, right? We are all working towards a world in which there is less violence or no violence, right? Including the violence of the state. And so what does it look like for us to be in deep partnership without suddenly we've had this new paradigm shift, and then we're going to start throwing each other under the bus about not having shifted fast enough. They're all shifted at the exact same time at the same pace. And so that's my hope, it's my plea that as we move this community into new ways of thinking, that we do so with love and compassion towards, and with respect for the wisdom and knowledge we bring from both our lived experience and our work in the field.
Can I just follow up a little bit on that? Because I agree completely, and I think at JDI we're in a slightly fortunate situation because we're not really very competitive with anybody because we're the only ones focusing on rape and retention. So on the one hand, we can stand a little bit outside of that competitiveness and also really appreciate the expertise and the special focus and skills of others. But then also, in addition to that, we spend an awful lot of time inside prisons and jails and youth detention centers. And in those contexts, we encounter corrections officials who very often disagree with us. And I have really, through this work, learned to kind of see the value of constructive disagreement and of trying to recognize, even when you're speaking with someone and interacting with someone where you have so little in common, to really try to still focus on that piece and build on that piece and to actually recognize how much you can make a small piece of agreement grow into a real partnership. And that's something that I feel in that sense, working with corrections officials and with often very hostile administrations is actually also a blessing in disguise.
So I've been thinking about how we were kind of set up, and I think we can argue whether we set ourselves up for this or we were set up for this, but this binary thinking, right? Victim, perpetrator, good, bad, evil, right, wrong. And I often wonder how that has really cemented this idea that we're in competition with one another, and that I said this earlier, it's a zero-sum game. That if we focus on issues of, solitary confinement and detention, that we then lose out on some other thing. And I always think about, and we have this conversation in our office often, that there's actually room for everyone, and there is actually room for all of these different focus points and touch points in our fields. And so I wonder sometimes whether we set ourselves up or we've been set up in this binary thinking, that these types of spaces, these conversations that are transformative and are courageous, that really help to dismantle that binary thinking and really thinking about an entire entity rather than, thinking about the entire elephant rather than just pieces of it, and then thinking that we're in competition for those pieces, and then being really mean to one another as a result of it. And so I guess I'm thinking that I'm really grateful to have these spaces and to have these conversations out in the light of day rather than out at the bar after 5 o'clock and sort of, in our dark corners, but and instead front and center right here talking about.
For me, and this is to add to what you just talked about in terms of this binary thinking and sort of the conflicts that exist within the anti-violence movement, whether it is you do domestic violence work, I do sexual assault work, or you approach justice from this perspective, I approach justice from that perspective. I think that there's a real gap that we need to fill in that we're all here together, right, at this conference, and we all do the work from a particular perspective, and we're all talking about, preventing sexual violence or gender violence, preventing violence in general. I think one of the things that, for me, that there's such a possibility to do is to go beyond just the folks in this room and to go beyond just the folks in the anti-violence movement to develop authentic collaboration, and even not just in building power within our communities, but also in policy work, in collaborative resource development. And I speak specifically to the intersectional issues. And so, for example, there's a cyclical relationship between high risk for sexual violence or domestic violence and poverty and the lack of economic security, right? So for me, that creates such an opportunity, there's such possibility there to create more collaborations with organizations that work on economic justice issues, but not in the way that we know that would only perpetuate more poverty, so getting low-wage jobs or just plain old job training and placing someone in a minimum wage job and calling that economic security because you've got that number for job placement, but really creating or engaging in new economies. Solidarity economy is a new avenue that survivors are really looking into. Being the producers instead of the sort of the products or dependent on particular types of economies, they produce their own economy. So looking at those solidarity economy measures, entrepreneurial skills and strategies, barter networks are amazing, gifting networks are amazing, susus or what they call lending circles are amazing. These are some of the things that we're testing out in our survivor communities in Brooklyn. That are coming out of immigrant communities because this is the way that we've been doing it for years. So just when I think of just the ways that we can work together and eliminating some of the silos, I think it's not just in this room or in our movements, but it's really with all of the other organizations that can contribute so much to helping all of us get free, honestly. So. Thank you, Farah.
I'm thinking about, it's been several years now that we started working more closely with Just Detention International and, at one of our national conferences, and, we started to have the mini tracks or the full tracks looking at the issue of incarcerated survivors, and it just wasn't a popular issue. And, people would know, but it's like, what do you do? And I think some folks would be like, no, it's important, but that's not our work. And then when I know that for folks who were in the workshop that I presented yesterday around creating bridges between the victim advocacy and people that are working with or treating people who committed sexual harm, I know that initially it was like, what are you doing? And are you going over to the other side? And, just kinds of questions, I think, and judgments about what that meant about you if you were trying to create those bridges, or I don't even think it appeared to be creating bridges, it appeared to be you're going over to the other side. And so, that can be hard. That can be hard when your own peers are looking at you and going, why are you doing this work? Why are you crossing over? Why are you making these connections when our work is to end sexual violence? Why are you doing this? And so I guess my next question really has to do with, I've been using the word at this conference quite a bit about stretching, but I want to kind of disregard that word now. Because I feel like, I've been saying that, but it's 2 days in. My staff can appreciate this right now. Okay, anyway, no, but because I feel like In order to create the kind of change that we are talking about, in order to create transformation, stretching is really not enough, right? We need to reinvent. We need to be very bold. We need to make these big leaps. And so, recognizing that it is hard to do so, and that you fall under scrutiny, and some folks get mad. Right? I'm wondering how each of you think we do that. How do you do that?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, especially in terms of working with, just attention and reaching across the aisle, I should say, to engage those who are considered to be harm doers, the untouchables, if you would. And for me, it's really about not trying to be a rock star. And that touches on a whole other thing in this movement, right? A whole other thing in this movement. To not just do what's popular and to not just do what everyone else is doing, but to really be true to yourself in order to continue to do this work, because it's not easy, right? In order to continue to create the change and see the vision, the world that we want to create, to see it manifest, I think we have to be beyond bold, beyond brave, beyond fearless. I think it takes sacrifice, because I'm going to be honest, and it takes compromise. And so, and it's also about, when you talk about reaching across the aisle, or when I say reaching across the aisle, and working with a population that almost everyone has discarded, especially in the anti-violence movement, it's about our survival. It's about really reaching that place where we can say, we have done all that we could. We've done all we can, and we've included all of the voices that we can. We have faced our fears. We have sat across the persons that no one else wants to sit across, because we haven't heard their voice yet. We've talked to everyone else. We've gotten all the answers that we can think of. And now who else is left to speak? It's the harm doers. It's those that we see as just, the folks who shouldn't even be looked at, who shouldn't be considered human, and who don't have a history of their own, a trauma, who don't have ideas of their own for how we can end sexual violence. And so to me, it's really about doing what we have to do. Do what you got to do. I know that sounds really simple, but for me, you ask how do you do that? It's really, that is how you do that. You get up and you say, I committed to this. If it takes 1,000 years to end violence, for us to create a world where there's no more sexual violence, what I'm doing in my early 40s now, okay, so I got 100 more to give. Yes, God.
Just tying into that, I think to have the courage to find partnerships, including in our differences as well, and to recognize that we don't have to all agree. We can't all do everything. So if we have constructive disagreements and still build respect and partnerships around those disagreements or different focal points or strategies, we will ultimately be much more successful. So, for example, just to go back to the prison abolitionist question, I think that the universe absolutely need abolitionist organizations that fight against the prison system. And at the same time, I'm deeply committed to working to improve the lives of the well over 2 million people who are in prison right now.
So for me, it's quite personal, and the struggle I have with taking unpopular positions is ancient. In that was missing the gene somehow to keep my mouth shut about the sexual abuse I was suffering in my home. And the consequences of being outspoken were severe. I lost my family, my people. Right? To be Konkani, the community I come from, is a collective experience. What does it mean to be an Indian immigrant without an Indian community? It's beyond dislocated, right? And so when I was working in the early 90s in the anti-violence against women movements, and I started to grapple with forgiving my father, and I started to question mass incarceration, which was growing as an answer, I was shown the door. And really reified that terrible experience a few years earlier, breaking silence about the abuse and being exited from sort of South Asian associations and other places where I was made to feel quite unwelcome when I kept raising gender issues and abuse in our community and stopped getting invited to family gatherings. And so very painful. Very, very painful. And I recently re-experienced that pain when I was the only survivor testifying against ending the statute of limitations on rape. And the whole crew was there. And I got in the elevator with the crew, and I know many people who were speaking from their heart about the desire to be able to have the person who harmed them prosecuted 20, 30 years later. And the day before, I had been in a healing circle with 65 survivors of child sexual abuse, none of whom felt that they could even utter the name of their family member, coach, imam, pastor, whatever, right, who would sexually abuse them because they never want that person prosecuted. And so the lifting of the statute of limitations actually kept them silenced about the identity of their abuser, right? And so I was coming to speak that very complex issue in their name. And once again, was sort of experienced that sort of shaming or that being pushed out, which apparently doesn't stop me from doing it, but does cause me to have to go home and either eat a lot of ice cream or crawl under the covers or call my besties and have them take care of me, which thank God I have today. But I think if I'm making a request, right, is that for us to know that when we speak in opposition to others' approaches, right, it's not out of disrespect, right, for your needs to be met, but it is also that some of us are speaking for other needs that rarely get heard, and that it's beyond sort of these secondary or collateral consequences. In a sense, some of us really see the criminal legal system as doing exactly what it is set out to do, right? Which is a continuation of colonialism and slavery. And I don't mean that to shame anybody for taking other positions, right? That's just my experience. And so I'm hoping for a world in which we have space for all of these positions.
You know, it's interesting that you brings that issue because I think it's something that I know that CALCASA is looking at and struggling with, and that the partnership was also looking at these kinds of issues. And historically, we would have supported that particular piece of legislation that you're talking about, and we didn't. We also didn't oppose it. And the reason is because it's so complex and we want to be respectful of survivors and what they need. And so basically what we're hearing is it's not one way or the other, right? And so some survivors need that, and some survivors need to be able to speak the name of the person that harmed them without losing control of letting the system kick in, losing control of that potentially. And so it's just complex and something that we are struggling with and really want to partner more closely with folks trying to figure that out. You know, we don't have the answers. We don't have the answers, but I think we do our best to try and figure it out. Become aware.
I think for me it goes back to the idea of this binary thinking, that if you oppose, then that makes you the bad guy, and if you are in support, that makes you the good guy. And I think that's where we get stuck. I think when we work with survivors, we're constantly talking about holistic approaches, looking at the whole survivor, understanding the context of the world that they live in, which is unique for every single person. And there's just something about once we get to our own, once we pull back from survivors and we're looking at ourselves as a system, where we fall back into that binary thinking and that zero-sum game. That's in order for someone to win, somebody has to lose. And I think that's where we get stuck. And where we have experiences like yours that I've heard for many years from many other advocates who have also been pushed out and who have been hurt very much by their own colleagues and the field. And so I also think about the idea that that historical context for me and the way that I kind of envision how we do revolutionary work is sometimes that we need to just remember what other people have done, because none of these ideas are necessarily unique to us. We've had traditions and cultures that have been doing this work in the most appropriate way for their people for a very long time. We've forgotten and we just don't know about it. And so there's something about being able to reach back and learn the stories that we don't know, the stories of resistance that we don't know, the stories of healing that we don't know about, that exist not only in our communities, but they also exist in our field and in our organizations. And I'm sure there are many stories within our own organizations of people existing and people really, really doing some revolutionary things that were just never written down and passed on.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time. I would like to ask one more question, so maybe we can try and keep it as brief. And that is just, given that some of our strategies appear to undermine one another's, right? So the world, it may look like our strategies undermine one another's. How do we work to create a beloved community among us?
From my side, there's a circle only has one side, right? I mean, this is it. There's no outro way that we can send people to when they either do or say things that we don't like. And all of it is information that can help us come up with the solutions. And so sometimes the greatest pushback for me is the greatest gift. And I think it's a request to be a beloved community with you, that you really do bring to us, this is my terror about you engaging in restorative processes around sexual harm, or this is the big hole that you are missing. This is a way in which your new process, even though our current process is doing great harm, and I agree with you, then if you do it your way, this is this other great harm that you're going to commit. And so my commitment to you in being a beloved community is to hear you and to honor you and to trust that you know things that I don't know, because you're doing work I don't do anymore. Right? And a lot has changed in 20 years since I was sort of more on the front lines work on this particular harm. And then I think I'd also just ask the same of you, from my side. We could be in dialogue to move forward in a good way.
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of it has to do with trust. And but also to recognize that we can all win. We're all winners. We're all winners just by virtue of sitting here today, by having this conference, by actually having decided for ourselves that we're not going to give up. We can stop sexual violence. And because we can, we will keep doing what we need to do. And we're choosing different ways of doing it. We have different focus areas, but I see us all as winners.
For me, it's about us individually acting and engaging with each other with mutual respect. It's also engaging each other with a love and authenticity, not only for the humanity in each other, but also for the work that we're all doing together. I think that for me also, what I always have to keep in mind is that we are, and I believe that each and every one of us in this room, we really are, the communities we serve, right? We are those communities. We're from those communities. And even if we're not from those specific communities in terms of, race, ethnicity, or even geography, we're part of a human community. We're all struggling and grappling with the same issues. We all want to live in peace. We all want safety. We all want bodily integrity. We all want autonomy over our lives. We want to be able to protect our children. So it's really just looking at those commonalities and respecting and acknowledging our differences, but still knowing that there really isn't that much of a separation because we are the ones that we're fighting for. We really are. And so that's, to me, creating a beloved community starts with that.
Mine's really short. Just have to decide too.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank the four of you for your contributions at this conference, for helping to challenge all of us to think, to expand our thinking, and to really transform the next 40 to 50 years. So thank you so much.